Good morning, Westside.
Good morning.
How do you find out what's going on in the wider world around you? Newspaper? Radio? Television news broadcasts? Or maybe gossip from friends and coworkers? Well, from these sources, do you get the sense that the world is quickly going to hell in a handbasket? That things were better back in the day, but as a society, we're heading over the edge of a cliff. Well, that kind of conclusion would be very easy to arrive at, given the kinds of news to which we're inundated every day. The modern news media preferentially feed us stories of doom and gloom. The old saying that if it bleeds, it leads is quite true. And why is that? Well, aside from their desire to increase circulation, pull in more listeners and viewers, or garner more attention than the other guy, it's because that's what we pay attention to. Given a range of stories from which to choose, we tend to focus on the most threatening and the most horrific. This is an evolved behavior. Every moment of our lives, our senses bring in way more data than we can possibly process. So its first stop in our brain is an ancient almond-shaped structure deep in our temporal lobe called the amygdala. Now, one of the major functions of the amygdala is to sort through that flood of information, identify anything that might pose a threat to our survival, and then rivet our attention on it. After all, you don't want to be mentally composing a long letter to your Aunt Louise if there's a hungry tiger approaching. This is why news is mostly the same bad stuff happening to different people every day. And our modern news media has been pretty accurately characterized as spreading darkness at the speed of light. Now, given their inclination to report bad news and our tendency to pay attention to what is threatening, are we getting an accurate impression of the world? In other words, is our pessimism really justified? A story about pessimism. An avid duck hunter was in the market for a new bird dog. His search ended when he found a dog that could actually walk on water to retrieve a duck. Shocked by his find, he was sure none of his friends would ever believe him, so he decided to break the news to a buddy of his who was a pessimist by nature, and invited his friend to go hunting with him and his new dog. As they waited by the shore, a flock of ducks flew by. They fired, and a duck fell. The dog responded immediately, jumped into the water. The dog, however, didn't sink, but instead walked across the water to retrieve the bird, never getting more than his paws wet. This continued all day long. Each time the duck fell, the dog walked across the surface of the water to retrieve it. The pessimist watched carefully, saw everything, but didn't say a word. On the drive home, the hunter asked his friend, "Did you notice anything unusual about my new dog?" "I sure did," replied the pessimist. "Your dog can't swim." Even if you're not a pessimist by nature, it sometimes seems difficult to be optimistic these days. But there's plenty of reason to hold high expectations for the near future. Peter Diamandis and Stephen Copper earlier this year published a book entitled Abundance. The future is better than you think. Now, it makes a pretty compelling case for thinking that technology has and will continue to make life better, safer, longer, and healthier than ever before. That indeed, at this very moment, we're enjoying an unprecedented level of well-being. Of course, we do have serious problems to overcome. Water and energy shortage, climate crisis, species extinction. These are all very real and very serious problems, but accomplishments over the last century amply demonstrate that as a species, we have the ability to identify and solve these kinds of problems. In the last 100 years, the average human lifespan has increased more than 2 times. Average per capita income worldwide, adjusted for inflation, has increased 3 times. Childhood mortality has decreased 10 times, as has the cost of food. The cost of electricity decreased 20 times. The cost of transportation decreased 100 times. And the cost of communications decreased 1,000 times. In addition, psychologist Steven Pinker, in his book, The Better Angels of Our Nature, has shown that, contrary to our intuitive perception, this is the most peaceful time in the history of the world. We're living in a remarkable age, and yet have a tendency to forget just what extraordinary lives we're living. In the U.S., the vast majority of people living below the poverty line have electricity, water, toilet, refrigerator, television, mobile phone, automobile, and air conditioning. Now, these things are things that the wealthiest robber barons at the beginning of the last century could have only dreamed of. And the technology that has enabled this kind of rise in living standard is accelerating at an exponential rate. To get some idea of what that means for us, let's examine the adoption of new technology throughout the 20th century. It took 46 years for 1/4 of the U.S. population to get electricity, 35 years for telephone, 16 years for the personal computer, 13 years for the cell phone, and 7 years for internet access. Solving the grand challenges of humanity is largely about using technology to take what is scarce and making it abundant. In the mid-1800s, Napoleon III hosted the King of Siam to a dinner party. Now, Napoleon's officers ate with silver utensils. Napoleon himself ate with gold utensils. And the King of Siam ate with aluminum utensils. Because at that time, aluminum was the most precious metal known to man, more valuable than gold or platinum. You see, although aluminum makes up 8.3% of the Earth's crust by weight, in nature it's bound chemically with oxygen and silicates in a clay-like mineral called bauxite. Refining pure aluminum from this native substance was quite difficult and costly. The tip of our own Washington Monument was capped in aluminum in 1884 for that same reason. In 1888, the Hall-Héroult electrolytic process for refining aluminum was developed and put into production a year later in 1889. So, if the builders of the Washington Monument had waited only 5 years, they could have just wrapped the entire top in aluminum foil. The point here is that the issue is not so much one of absolute scarcity, but one of access. And technology is the key to that access. Take energy. We hear a great deal about the growing need for energy the world over, and dire predictions about the inability of our current production capacity to satisfy that need. The sun that shines on our planet contains 5,000 times more energy than we humans use. 16 terawatts of energy strike the Earth's surface every 88 minutes. And the good news is that just this year, for the first time in India, the cost of solar-generated electricity is half that of diesel-generated electricity, 8.8 rupees versus 17 rupees. The cost of solar-generated electricity dropped 50% last year alone. A recent study released by MIT indicated that by the end of this decade in the sunny regions of the U.S., solar electricity will be 6 cents a kilowatt hour compared to 15 cents as a national average. Anybody getting tired or bored yet? I don't want to be like this guest speaker that I heard about a while ago who had a member walk out of the sanctuary in the middle of his talk, only to return about a minute before the conclusion. When asked why he left, the guy said, "Well, I had to get a haircut." And when the speaker pressed him a little bit and said, "Well, why didn't you get a haircut before the service?" In typical you canter, the guy responded, "I didn't need a haircut before the service." important is it that we create an abundance of clean water? Well, for starters, 3.5 billion people a year die of water-related illnesses. And there are places in the world where people spend as much as 4 hours a day just to transport enough potable water to survive. The need for sustainable sources of clean water is not exclusively an issue for developing countries either. 70% of the world's fresh water is used for agriculture, and the reason for that is that a single egg requires 120 gallons to produce. A watermelon requires 100 gallons, and meat takes an incredible 2,500 gallons per pound. As Newsweek reported, the water that goes into a 1,000-pound steer would float a destroyer. Now, much of that fresh water is what's known as fossil water, meaning it took tens of thousands of years to accumulate in deep underground aquifers and is not easily replenished. Many of these ancient aquifers have been drained to the point of near collapse. What's needed is a more sustainable approach to water abundance. Well, if we have abundant energy, we can have abundant water. 70% of our planet is covered with water. 97.5% is salt water. 2% is bound up in our polar ice caps, and we fight over the remaining 0.5% of fresh water. Dean Kamen, inventor of the Segway, has invented a water purification device he's named Slingshot. About the size of a dorm room refrigerator, it has the capacity to distill 1,000 liters of water per day from any water source at a cost of less than 2 cents per liter at today's electronic prices. The Coca-Cola Company is now conducting field tests of several hundred of these devices in third world countries. If successful, they plan to deploy them in 206 countries around the world. Now, the Slingshot is designed to serve about 100 people in rural areas, primarily in developing nations. It's not designed for large-scale urban deployment, but it is an example of the kind of technical innovation needed to address a growing thirst for clean water. About 6 weeks ago, it was announced that General Electric's Aquacell non-thermal brine concentrator, and isn't that a mouthful, just completed a pilot study at a beverage bottling plant where it enabled a water recovery rate of over 99% while purifying about 1,500 liters per hour. GE's reverse osmosis technology can turn billions of gallons of lost water into clean, usable water by virtually eliminating the wastewater streams in a variety of industrial and municipal treatment processes. Now, these are just two examples of many approaches being pursued to provide universal access to clean water. We're witness to a beginning of a tsunami of invention that will create the technology to provide for a thirsty world. From where will all this innovation come? Well, the world population just topped 7 billion people last fall. We've seen how mobile computing has exploded in the US, and that's happening the world over. Today, a Maasai warrior with a cell phone has better mobile communications than the President of the United States had 25 years ago. If he has a smartphone connected to the internet, he has better access to information than the President of the United States had 15 years ago. It's almost impossible to overestimate the profound impact that advanced network computing has on our global society with the opportunities for education and collaboration provided by the internet. This fall, edX, a new learning platform jointly presented by MIT and Harvard, will be available free to anyone with an internet connection. Then there's Coursera, which now consists of 16 major universities offering over 100 classes at no cost. And of course, the Khan Academy offers an educational curriculum ranging from grade school to university level courses and boasts 4 million unique viewers a month. Now, you can not only access education from the internet, but also become a participant in solving the great challenges of our time through such organizations as Solve for X and Open IDEO. Financial backing for startup ventures has often been a major barrier to innovation, and the internet is also helping with that. An example is the B9 Creator, a 3D printer invented by Michael Joyce of Deadwood, South Dakota. Michael successfully obtained funding to bootstrap his startup on June 12th of this year through Kickstarter, an internet site that enables people to pledge financial support for projects they deem worthy of supporting. About May 10th, Michael posted a video demonstration of his prototype and set a target date of June 12th to reach his goal of $50,000 in order to begin commercial manufacturing and distribution of his 3D printer. By June 12th, he received pledges and pre-orders in excess of $500,000. Now, this methodology simultaneously accomplishes both funding and test marketing of new products and ideas. And in this case, it's a clear indicator of rapid growth potential for an entirely new industry. Last September, the online gamers of Folded solved the three-dimensional structure of the retroviral protease that contributes to AIDS. Understanding this structure is very important in developing treatments. And for 15 years, with the use of the world's best supercomputers, it went unsolved in the scientific community. The gamers of Folded solved it in 15 days. In 2010, there were 2 billion internet users online worldwide. By 2020, it will be 5 billion. That's 3 billion new minds joining the global conversation. I believe the combined intelligence and collaborative effort of these billions of empowered human beings bodes well for a remarkable future here on planet Earth. And we need only to enthusiastically embrace the imagination and potential that lies within each of us. Our responsive reading today was from Henry David Thoreau. I'd like to close with a quote from his mentor, friend, and fellow transcendentalist, Ralph Waldo Emerson. Be not the slave of your own past. Plunge into the sublime seas, dive deep, and swim far. So you shall come back with self-respect, with new power, with an advanced experience that shall explain and overlook the old. As we rise in body or spirit and join together in singing our closing hymn, number 354, we laugh, we cry.